when we're not truly being authentic, when we're not truly presenting with the identity and the personality we know is ours, we feel a sense of depression. We feel a sense of loss of self.
It's the Germany Experience, the podcast about life in Germany as seen through the eyes of outsiders. I'm your host, Sean, and you can visit the website, thegermanyexperience.de, and email me, info@thegermanyexperience.de. And I'm very, very excited about this episode. It is with someone named Katie Rössler, and she was one of the speakers at the Welcome to Germany Summit that I spoke at the end of September. And her topic was on hidden grief. And this is something that she speaks a lot about. And in fact, she's written a book about it called The New Face of Grief. And the whole concept of this hidden grief thing is that it applies to many things. And it also applies to foreigners in new countries. There's a lot of hidden grief that you may not even know is grief that can affect your experience in a new place. Things like grieving the person that you've left behind, grieving when things don't go the way that you imagined in your mind. And a lot of this can have a lot of negative consequences on your life as a foreigner in a new country if you don't realize what's going on. And I think this is a great thing about what Katie has to say. And Katie and I spoke a lot about this, but we also get a bit into what happens when you have to get to know someone that you care about. Let's say you come over here with a spouse, but when you get here, that person has a different identity almost in Germany. And you have to get to know a new person. So all of this can make for very complicated emotional situations. But the thing about Katie is she is so insightful. I had the feeling I could speak to her for hours because pretty much any question I asked, she just had so much wisdom and insights to share. So just a little bit about Katie. She guides transformative coaches and healers in understanding how hidden grief molds our personality and identities. And these are two of our greatest tools for growth to live a life of purpose and legacy. She brings a fresh new perspective to an experience that so many of us try to avoid. Katie has worked in homes, schools, locked facilities, community centers, and private practices, providing therapy and grief support to hundreds of clients both in the USA and in Germany. And as I said, she wrote the book called New Face of Grief. She has another book coming out. She speaks about that in the interview as well. It's an amazing chat. I think there's a lot to gather about this. It certainly made me think about things that I have grieved in the past that I may not have realized were grief. But here is Katie Rössler. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast, Katie.
Hello, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I must straight off the bat just excuse my voice. I have a bit of a gruff voice. We had a team event on the weekend, and yeah, my problem is I like to sing on the dance floor. I happened to sing on Saturday night so loudly that my voice is still messed up on Monday. So I apologize about it.
No worries.
It's like a podcast voice, but like not my normal podcast voice. So welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited to have you on. And the way that we connected was through the Welcome to Germany Summit 2022, and that's how I got to know you. And what was your topic that you covered?
Yeah, I talked about the emotional experience of expats, and in specific that we all experience grief, and we just don't understand it to be that way, and how we can start to navigate it once we recognize it.
Yeah, and that got me thinking because before the summit, even like I said, we connected, and then I suddenly realized I had heard you before, and I remember you were on the Expat Cast, which I had forgotten about. My rival podcast, by the way. We're sworn rivals. It's very bitter, very 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 ugly sometimes.
I love you both. So
all right. Well, at least you're hedging your bets. Like you're safe, Katie. So I find it a very fascinating topic, and one of the reasons that I find it, in fact, we'll get to that in a second, but you've also written a book about this, among other books that you've written.
Yeah. So it's called The New Face of Grief, and it's how we can start to look at grief from a different standpoint. We often
Mm.
think about grief just related to death, but in
Yeah.
reality, we grieve throughout our lives for a variety of reasons. And the book really helps you start to open your eyes to really a new side of grief as a
Yeah.
tool for our growth, as a normal part of life. And a lot of people who've been reading it are finding that it's freeing them of a lot of things they've been holding on to, thinking something was wrong with them.
Yeah, this is something that it does to me. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't read the book yet. I am fully intend to, but because it's blown my mind a little bit, this whole concept of specifically listening to your topic and just also just finding out a little bit more about this, because exactly like you said, and I think one of the descriptions in the book says it's time that we update our definition of grief, and I think that is very much the case for me, because exactly like you just said, I always think of it in terms of the big things that happen in our lives, like maybe a divorce or death or something like that. But you can actually grieve for a lot of things.
Yeah. Oh, completely. I mean,
Yeah,
even growing up, if we think
yeah,
back to those moments where like, oh man, I'm really missed this part or this stage of my life. And for some of us, we can feel that for months. That's
yeah.
a large reason why so many experience a quarter life crisis right now and the midlife crisis, which I really just call transitions, because it's
Right.
truly just a grief process of transitioning to a new stage in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, incredible. So yeah, and I'll just read the book description briefly. Grief is not only a reaction to death and loss, but also a natural part of life as we learn to let go of how we thought life would or should go, which I also find quite interesting. By leaning into the transformative process of grief, Katie Rössler normalizes a topic society doesn't discuss enough. One that, when ignored, can lead to addiction, disconnection from loved ones, and increased stress. I mean, that like not coping with this grief can be pretty serious and have dire consequences.
Yeah, and I think I think all of us experienced over the last 3 years at some point a
Yes.
realization of we have some things we need to work on
Yeah.
and express and feel again. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots that we want to get into, especially that idea of like, it's also like this grief for something that we expect to be a certain way and it ends up not being a way. And this is something that applies, of course, very much to people who have made the decision to move to another country, like Germany. So there's a lot of grief that's involved there for expats and foreigners.
Yeah, totally. I find it shows up the most where people can go, ah, yeah, for expats. And then if you're not in a place in your career you thought you would be by now. Those are the two areas where people are like, ah, I do know what grief feels like. I do know
Yeah.
that feeling of letting go of how I thought life should go or
Yeah.
would go. And as an expat, it's a component of it is you go into a new country not realizing that you will change completely. Like we think, no, I'll still be myself. There's no way. But you can't go into an environment and not change. Like that's just a normal part of human behavior is we shift and adapt to our surroundings.
Yeah.
And so as expats, what can happen is then we start to grieve who we thought we would be moving to this country. We grieve how it turned out versus how it was. And that's not to say that it's bad. Often we think grief means something bad turned out, like the consequence was negative. But, I'm a mom of three and I love my three kids, but I grieve singlehood and not having them and that freedom. And I still love them. So there's
Yeah.
there's grief that's just an acknowledgement of the changes in life.
Yeah, and not to feel bad about that, because with you saying that now, that is also something that I've had. Like, I would never change the world that I had my kids. I also have three kids. Like, that's definitely not something I would change. But there are times, exactly like you said, like we think, I look at some people who have no kids and they're just flitting off for vacations wherever, whenever they want. And I'm like, that's nice. That would be
Right.
nice.
Like, oh,
And
I wish I could get out the door in like 2 minutes.
yeah, without arguing about whether shoes are like an important accessory or not, basically. That's what I
Right.
would like.
What jacket? Do I wear a hat? I need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah,
I mean, and
exactly.
it's the same for when we move as expats. We come here and then it's like, do we go to this event or do we not? What do we wear? What do we not wear? You
Yeah,
go in as yourself, but you morph, you
yeah.
transition.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that. I'm very excited to get into that with you in a minute. But before we even get to that, maybe just give me your background and how it is that you ended up in Germany.
Yeah. So I married a man with an accent. My husband is German. And prior to us meeting, I had already finished my master's in marriage and family counseling and had a private practice. And we got married, we had our first kid, and we always knew we wanted to move back to Germany. We were pregnant with our second. We're like, it's time, let's go. And so we moved here. It was 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he had quite an interesting transition. And I know we'll talk further about this as well, but coming back to his home country after living for 6 years in a different country was actually very challenging because he finished university time and then went into the working world in America.
Right.
And so he learned healthcare system and retirement and the business world from that framework. And then we moved here and he had a 2-year-old, a pregnant wife, and was trying to find a place for us to live, a crippa, and figure out the new retirement system and now the healthcare system and public and private. And it really was a lot on his shoulders. And I didn't recognize that at the time. I'm thinking, we're moving to your home country. You already know all this. Why is this so
It's just
hard?
an assumption that you make, right? You don't even maybe think of the fact that it could be more difficult for him.
Exactly. And it wasn't until that Christmas when I was like, honey, where do we buy a tree, like a holiday tree? And he was like, I don't know.
Okay.
And I'm like, where did you guys buy trees in the past? And he's like, my mom always took care of that. Like, I don't know. I lived here in Munich when I was a teenager. Why would I know these things?
Right.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
And that was the point where you're like, oh, your adult life has been in America. So you know all of that, like the things that you need to know as an adult. Let's go get the tree. What do we do for this holiday or festival and thing? I mean, he knew Oktoberfest, let's be real. Like he already
good. So he's got the major bases covered.
Exactly. But all the other holidays, he was a little bit like off on like, I don't know where we get this and I don't know. And he did recognize that on holidays that everything is closed. Whereas in America, everything's open still.
I know that's a huge thing. Yeah. But that's interesting that it could be such a big adjustment. But before we talk a bit more about that, like you said that it was definite that you were going to come back to Germany. You knew for a fact that it was going to happen. What was the reason for that certainty?
Because when we were first dating, he made it very clear that, hey, if this works out, I want to live in Germany and raise my family there. And I grew up in a military family. So moving around was, the longest I'd stayed in one place was college, the 4 years of college. So my childhood was like up and down. We were always moving. So I was like, oh yeah, I've lived in Germany. My brother was born here. I could totally live in Germany. Very romanticized view of what that life would be like, right? Yes. And then we moved here. And honestly, I was in the honeymoon phase for a couple years. And then it was the transition of like, oh wait, we're here.
Yeah.
You're listening to this and you know that feeling of like, oh no, we're here.
Yeah.
And there's like a kind of feeling that comes with
Yes, a guest on one of the previous episodes actually said, she came to realization. She was like, so this is it. Is this it? Is this where they're going to bury me? Am I going to be buried in a German cemetery? And I mean, like, just that just shows you that, like, that realization, like, oh, this is permanent in a way. I mean, nothing's permanent, but this is now where I'm going to be, or this is where it's going to stay.
Yeah, completely. And moving here, I wasn't sure if I would be able to work in my field. The field of counseling is very different here than it is in the States. But thankfully, things have worked out where I've been able to do workshops for couples. I'm gearing up to do some things for expat parents who have preteens and teens and like how to work on, some emotional intelligence and relationship building. So I've been able to still support people in a way that really helps me fulfill my passion and my purpose while living abroad in a very different context than I had imagined in the beginning.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things that came up, I think, in your talk was this concept of identity. And you mentioned a bit with your husband as well, when, it's his culture or supposed to be his culture. So you wouldn't expect that someone would have a tough time returning to it. And then I think also what you touched on in your talk is this identity, like how difficult it can be when your identity changes because you're in a new country and so on. Is that something that you guys experienced as well?
Oh, completely. so we've been here for 6 years, and it was this summer that a fellow counseling buddy came to visit me, and we were walking, and I said, I'm just now realizing that I'm having to get to know my husband as a German husband and not as the German in America husband.
Right.
And I'm having to figure out myself as American Katie in Germany.
Yeah.
And what that looks like, because there is so much of us that shifts when you're in an environment in the United States where I lived in the South, like you welcome everybody, you chit chat with everybody, you smile at everybody. And we moved here and it was a big shift really fast. I was aware the shift would be there. And so was my husband. But when you live amongst it even more, you start to feel yourself stop being as friendly, stop smiling as often, and that was really hard for both of us because part of our personalities is that really outgoing and friendly and welcoming sort of style. So that shifted in us. And that was something this last year that I realized I have control over. I don't have to mirror what I see, even though those mirror neurons, like if they don't smile, I don't smile. If I, but I can actually choose to still be friendly and chit chat as best I can. And, I think I made a joke in my presentation for the summit that I got really good. My German, when it comes to complaining, is like almost excellent. Because that was how the moms that I was talking with in the kindergarten line or at school were like, connecting. And I was like, oh God, this just feels like you walk away going like, the whole world is so negative. But then I was like, oh, I can bring up positives. I can share good things. I don't have to do that. But when you want to assimilate, when you want to like blend in, you follow what everyone else do as the Romans, right? But then you go like, this is so anti-me. This doesn't feel like my true nature. And you have to stop and look in the mirror and say, I do have control over this.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a habit to respond this way.
Yeah, but I think a big part of that is realizing what's going on. Like you it sounds like you came to at some point a realization. Okay, I don't have to just mirror this negativity or what we perceive. Let's put it this way: what we perceive as negativity. I don't have to mirror it. I can be my own way with this, even if it's maybe not the same way old Katie was. But what do you think brings someone to that point to think, hang on, I don't have to do this?
I think it's this unhappiness. Like when we're not truly being authentic, when we're not truly presenting with the identity and the personality we know is ours, we feel a sense of depression. We feel a sense of loss of self.
Yeah.
And I experienced this as well at the beginning of motherhood, where it was like, I don't even know who I am anymore. And it's like, oh, because I stopped doing the things that made me me. Because I adapted to this new identity instead of realizing I can integrate. I can bring myself into this new picture. It may not be 100% my old self because, of course, we're always growing and changing, but I don't have to make that piece go. So I find it's when we just feel really depressive. If your nature is not to pick out the negatives, some people it is. But if it isn't, and you're finding you're doing that a lot, okay, that's a red flag. Like, why am I pointing out all the negatives? Why do I only feel the negatives? And then that's when you sort of kind of reverse engineer. Okay, this is what's happening. How did I get here? Like, what were the steps that made me feel that way? And, for me, it was like, I would smile and try to chit chat with the, woman ringing up my groceries. And it's like, oh, every time I got rejected, it felt like rejection, not, oh, this is a different personality.
Yeah.
This is a different identity and how customers and customer service works. That I really had to adapt to understanding that it wasn't about me.
Right.
And it wasn't that I was doing something wrong. It was just I'm different and that's okay.
And that's okay. I think that's the important part about that, because I think in a lot of foreigners' minds is they're so determined to adapt and integrate that there's a temptation to push yourself too far. I've even had a guest as well who said that she realized she'd gone too far the other way, that she was being inauthentic, if you want to come back to that word, because she was trying so hard. We have it in our minds. You integrate into the culture and everything, and it seems to me like there is a point where it's too far, that you're actually overextending yourself to a degree.
That's the importance of really just taking time for yourself and saying, who am I? Who do I want to be? And like, how am I living authentically? And I don't think we take time to do that very often.
Yeah, we
I do
don't.
think when we were all in lockdown, we did, and that was another reason why people didn't like what was going on and how they were feeling.
Yeah.
Um, but it just takes, even go for a walk by yourself. You don't have to do like a whole half day retreat or something. Like, just
Mm.
go for a walk and be like, do I feel like I'm living authentically? And who am I authentically? What does
Yeah.
that look like? I mean, that's why I love working with clients, because often I can, like, they'll tell me their life story and I can pick out pieces from it to go like, oh, this is who you are. And then
Mm.
when I reflect that, they'll be like, wow, I haven't felt like that person in so long. And I go, okay, well, how do we get back there? So sometimes it helps to talk with somebody who can say, here's the pieces of the puzzle. Maybe they go in a different order now, but it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that talking to someone is a hugely important part of it, because yeah, you can take time out on yourself, but I also think that there's certain realizations that you maybe can't come to on your own at a specific point in the process. Maybe you're missing something, or not that's not willing to think about something, and I think that talking to someone is definitely a good thing in that approach.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it took me 6 years to figure out. Some of the grief work I was doing was figuring out that I'm having to get to know my husband in a different way. I still love him, but I'm learning him in this different identity. And prior to that, I was just sort of angry at like who he was becoming, and I wasn't reflecting on who I was becoming too. So
Yes.
it's very easy to point the finger at the other person and be like, oh, look at, you're like this, you're like that. And it's like, wait, but who am I? And it took going for some walks and really saying like, what's going on inside of me? Why am I always angry at this person or these people or this
Yeah.
situation? And often anger is, for me personally, anger is the sign that like something's out of balance.
Right.
If I'm super frustrated, what's not in alignment? Like what am I doing, or what's in my surroundings that I have control over that I can start to fix? And as expats, we kind of get into the whirlwind of new life, new things, new job, whatever it might be. Or if you're the kind of the trailing spouse,
Yeah.
you're sitting around and you have almost too much time to think, but it goes into a negative way.
Yeah.
And it can be really challenging.
Yeah, it is. It's such a complicated thing, and it puts a legitimate strain, or can put a legitimate strain on a relationship. And I think this is something also that foreigners might not think about when they're moving to a new country. I mean, there's going to be the culture shock, but this strain on identity like you said, you're getting to know someone new, and it could be that you don't like that new person, right? It could be that whoever
Right.
this person is becoming over here. I mean, you work hard at it and try to understand everything, but it could be that this person changes in a way that you didn't expect, that you cannot connect with anymore.
Right. And I also think about the fact that even if my husband and I come from the same country, the same state, the same neighborhood, we both would still change because
Mm,
there would be other factors that
mm,
would change our identity and change our personality. So every couple is always relearning each other. That's why when I did couples therapy for a long time, it would be a little bit frustrating for me when I would hear like, well, you're not the person you were. Well, of course not. And neither is the other person. Neither of you are. And there are things that drew you to that person, but are they not allowed to adapt and change? You get to decide if you can still love that person and live with them. But often we get into this, like they have to remain the same, but we
mm.
ourselves are not the same.
Yeah, and it's realizing that and acknowledging that, because it's to aspects too. You might even not like the self, the yourself that you've becoming. For example, when I moved here, my identity crisis, and I mentioned this in my summit talk as well. I also lost an important part of my identity, which was my humor. Like humor is the way I connected with people before. Like that was I was always very socially awkward, and I developed this humor to make me fit in more and stuff. So it was almost like a crucial part of my personality that I needed to survive. And I came here and it didn't work. It just didn't work. Like I couldn't make the same jokes. If I made a throwaway comment, the Germans would analyze it to within like an inch of its life. and then it's no fun. It's not even a joke anymore, and it's gotten weird. And that was something that, like, now who am I? You know?
Yeah.
So that there's that aspect, and when you're dealing with that kind of thing, to also at the same time get to know someone else who maybe provided you the support that you needed in the past, who is now also going through some stuff, it just gets really, really complicated and messy.
Oh, completely. I loved doing couples therapy for expats here in the city
Mhm.
because I could sit with them and all that uncomfortability and go, I promise it does get better because you're
Okay.
doing the work. You're actually going seeing somebody to help improve this.
Yeah.
If you're in that mentality, we'll figure this out. If we can't figure it out, then we don't need to, make this work. It's like, no, I'm sorry. I don't expect to be able to put a car together. I didn't go to engineering school and like know all, like, so I don't expect to figure out how to keep your marriage going in certain areas or have healthy communication. You need an expert to come and help support you
Mm.
in those things. That's not a problem, but and I think expats too, because we get very scared. We're in a community where maybe they don't speak the language. How do we find somebody who speaks
Yeah.
and I call it the romantic language. How did you meet? Because that's the language that you need to do therapy in. The
Okay, I
language
see.
you guys were speaking, no matter if the other person started learning the other language, how you guys started sharing how much you love each other. That's the language you need to be doing therapy in.
Right. It's to get back to that what you knew at the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's the root of how you met, how you guys formed the bond, and we go back to that. And then later on, if you want to speak the new language, that's fine. But really at the core, there's just an importance to finding support. And as expats, we isolate ourselves so much because, as you said, you lost your humor, you lost a part of yourself. You probably felt like this almost burial inside of like,
Yeah.
I have to let this piece of me go. But had you had someone to support you to say, okay, like, how do you still allow that part of you out? And when they analyze, you look at them and be like, y'all need to take a break. Like, how do you add that humor in a way that relaxes them? Because
Yeah.
I will tell you, the friends here that some of the moms, like, I'll make a joke and they're like, it's almost like they feel freed to have somebody make that joke that they wish
Right.
they could say.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, see, you can do it. Like, but it's about no longer feeling rejected inside. And I think
Yeah.
that piece can be really hard because we're trained to believe that everything is rejection.
Yeah, and then it's all us. Like everything is us, and we're rejected. It's and you're even more sensitive and in tune to that as a foreigner because like you're picking up on every single nonverbal cue and every single thing that someone says. You're analyzing and like how are Germans seeing me, and that's a dangerous place to be because you're just going to fall into the trap of spiraling down. Really, I think.
Completely. And I have a funny story to explain this. So, my husband turned 30 in the States, and we had this big party, and I was the one organizing it. And his parents decided to come over from Germany to be there with us, and they were going to help, and all these things. And oh, wonderful, great. I have my Pinterest board because I was that type of wife and mom. I have my Pinterest board, and this is what we're going to eat, and this is what we're going to have, and all this stuff. And my husband, the day before, was super stressed and really reactive to all of us, and really kind of like angry. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And his mom sort of said to me to the side, there was nothing that we had started making food or talked about food at all. I'll preface it with this. She said, well, I wonder if it's because he's worried not all the food will be done and prepared before the guests arrive. And I was like, what? So of course, I'm like, oh my God, I'm failing as a wife and mom. And, but I realized when moving here, when you go to an event, I mean, the table's set, everything is prepared. And she was thinking back to cookouts she had done with us where my friends came together and we cooked together. That was part of our friend culture, I guess. Like things weren't ready because it wasn't a feeling like we failed. It was a feeling of community. Come together, we'll cook, we'll create.
Right.
So she knew that we had this mentality when it comes to events. And she was thinking, oh my God, that's going to stress me out.
Yeah.
Maybe
So it
that's
must
stressing
be.
him out.
Yeah.
Whereas he was like, no, I'm just stressed because I got my wife, I've got my child, I've got my parents, and we're trying to fit everybody in the small apartment for a birthday party. So and we were able to, but for her, I was like, oh my God, this is about me. I'm failing. And then
Exactly.
it wasn't till I moved here and saw the culture of events that I was like, oh,
I see now why that would stress her out.
this is this is normal.
Yeah.
So we have to go into it with an understanding and a disconnect from everything's about us to what is it about them and why do they like those things that way and how do I like it? And then, okay, we're allowed to be different. Apples, oranges.
Yeah. I like that. I like that approach but just to have that mindfulness, like, okay, it's not necessarily me. Like, how is this not me? Let's just analyze the situation, see how it could be. Where are they coming from? And also, why am I taking it so personally?
Right, right. We desire to be liked. That's human nature. We want to be
Yeah.
liked. There's very few who can say out there like, I don't really care. Okay, great. Super, you've done the work. But or you're in denial. But we want to be liked. And when you're an expat, you so want to be welcomed. And there
Yeah.
are some cultures in the world that are just not like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean, Germany's kind of in that direction. I mean, like,
yeah,
I must say I have had Germans be very welcoming to me, and I think that there are other cultures where I know people struggle as well, or maybe even more.
yeah.
So, but it is still a difficult culture to come to terms with for some, I guess. One of the things I wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier, like your opinion is if you're angry, something is out of balance. But I think that something that I've heard a lot on this podcast from multiple guests in the past is that they do get frustrated, and then they really take it out on their partner, and then they hate themselves for it because, as one guest said, like, this aggressive person isn't me, and yet here I am being super aggressive to someone. I think her context was she was struggling to find a job, and there was a lot of other things going on, and then you end up taking it out on the people around you. So there's two aspects of this. If you're a partner for someone like this that is taking, I mean, I think anger can be a huge problem if you don't get behind it and look at the reasons for it. So you've got someone that's really taking their anger out on you and their frustration, and they're short-tempered potentially. Or at the same time, that person is afterwards feeling like, why am I like this? Why am I feeling so angry? How do you work around these kinds of anger issues that I think pop up in a lot of expat relationships or foreigner relationships?
Yeah. Well, I'll first just say, it is very normal. I mean, if we think about how, um, again, just being parents, sometimes our children are great for everybody else, but not us.
Yeah.
And they take out their tantrums and their I'm tired and their I'm angry on us because
Yeah.
we are safe. And our partner, who usually lives with us or we see often, is our safe person.
Okay.
And so we let that out on them kind of with the hopes that they'll never go unless we really don't like them. We want them to go. But usually it's like, you're my safe place. I'm just going to word vomit this out, emotional hurricane this everywhere. And then they're left cleaning up everything. So when I have clients who are facing this, the first thing I say is, what are your anger outlets? And half the time they look at me with a blank stare. And I'm like, how are you releasing your frustration and your anger that is in nonverbal ways? Healthy outlets are what I usually go towards, but usually they'll say, well, I have a drink at the end of the day when I've had a bad day, and we'll go, okay, so those things numb and they
Right.
don't release the anger. So what are the outlets? And you think of like a soda bottle. If you shake, 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 if you just open it completely, it explodes everywhere. But if we do a little bit at a time, it releases it slowly so that it doesn't make a mess.
Right.
Other people shouldn't have to clean up your anger mess. So what are your outlets? And it's different for different people. For some, it is exercise. It is doing something where it's like an output. For some of it, it's writing it where nobody will see it and then burning that letter. But we all need our anger outlets so that we're not taking it out on our safe people, because it isn't fair to them. I mean, if we're all going to do it a little bit, but when you really become like a person you don't like being in that relationship because you're always letting it out, you don't have an anger outlet, or outlets plural. And that is crucial. And I think any couple I've worked with obviously are coming to therapy because they have some stuff, but that has been a big problem is I don't have a safe place. I have a safe person, but that poor person is now,
They're taking everything.
yeah, exactly. And if they don't have a safe way to release what they just took on, then it becomes this cycle that becomes really unhealthy. If you've had a bad day at work, it's figuring out what are going to be those things that I do to release that shaken up bottle so that I can be present at dinner and enjoy and not snap at my partner because they said something wrong or did something wrong.
Yeah.
We're going to be more testy. I mean, it's like being hangry, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
the solution is to eat something and regulate your blood sugar. Great. Okay, so what will help you with your anger? And it's different for different people.
Yeah. Well, give me some examples of what could be a good anger outlet.
Yeah, so I am huge on going for runs or walks, and with the runs, I usually throw in a couple sprints. Like I need to physically
Angry
exhaust
sprints.
myself. Yeah, like, but I've had people. I've told them like go bowling. throw something, throw rocks in but you need to intentionally be thinking about what makes you angry as you're throwing
Okay.
that rock in the water. We often just like, oh, I'm just going to let it out or whatever. And it's like, no, if you go for that run or you go for that walk, I want you to really be thinking about what is frustrating you. You're going to notice you speed up because your brain's like, this and this and this and this and this. And for some, it's that physical exhaustion. We need to feel like, I used to love going to the batting cage. That in the States, you could find the baseball and the batting cage. It was super easy. That's not here. So
No,
like,
that's not
you would
here.
let it out. Like that was just, it's a safe place that's acceptable to do that. Go kick a soccer ball up against a fence. That's careful.
Yeah.
But things like that. For others, it truly is creating something like painting and thinking about the anger as they're doing it, writing that like hate letter that you need to, I hate this, I hate that, whatever it might be, or I'm angry about this, and literally watching it burn. Like that, truly, burning rituals are so impactful. I mean, I've had clients who ended up wrapping that letter that they couldn't give to that person around a rock and throwing it into a river, just knowing it's like, it's there and it's at the bottom, it's safe and protected, but like I got it out kind of thing. Guided meditations that help you visualize you actually like it coming off of you, the anger coming off of you and releasing it. Physical massages, especially if you're going through a breakup and you have a lot of like issues with relationship stuff, a massage, that physical touch can help. But also it might make you emotional and like releasing the things, because anger is the top of the iceberg of the emotions that are below. And below, it's usually embarrassment and fear and sadness and loneliness and, so many different pieces and grief. But anything where you're kind of numbing yourself, scrolling on the phone, watching the Netflix series, drinking, eating sugar or salt, like the stuff that is supposed to really numb, everything in your brain and kind of like turn stuff off and go, oh, well, it just helps me turn off. Yeah, but then it's still there.
It's a good thing. I think that escapism is a good thing, but you're not actually solving the problem. You've got another issue that needs to be actually physically resolved, or not physically
like
resolved.
Later on, don't be upset that it's not gone because you had you time in quotations that helped you relax. No, you turned off. You didn't. You didn't actually work on it. And then I've had clients who just love coming to therapy because it's that place where they can like just say all the stuff and to have somebody hold space to hear your anger. Like, and even yell it out if you have to, can be freeing because it's safe. It's not going to come back and used against you, and things like that can really help. So so there's a whole bunch right there. There's a
lot of things, and I think just hearing some of those examples is incredible. Because also from the other side of it, if you're on the receiving end of this kind of anger and stuff, it could be easy to become resentful of your partner. And I think resentful is where things start going wrong in a relationship, when there's a lot of resentment. But if you're aware of this and also are able to maybe suggest ways of dealing what seems to be an anger, because this person is not normally this angry, and suddenly here in Germany this anger is becoming more present and stuff. It's a case of working through that person and saying, hey, this isn't you, but I think maybe there's reasons for this that don't have to do with me. Let's try and figure it out. So from the other side, it's also good to have these things in mind that you can suggest or that you can talk through with your partner and maybe get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, totally. And I highly recommend to my clients often to like either listen to a podcast together or watch a video together, read a blog together that touches on things like this, so that it's not one partner telling the other what to do.
Right.
Because that's also when we start to get defensive, like, no, you're showing my imperfections and what I'm doing wrong, and I feel like I'm failing already, and great, now you're going to leave me. And it's like, oh my God, I just wanted to help.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, it's a lot of things to think about here. I just want to get back to the grief aspect of this for a second. So, like for me, like we were mentioning earlier, I did grieve the loss of my personality over here. I felt like I was incredibly boring when I came to Germany. Like German Sean to me it still is to a degree, even though my German is better now. But I still feel like I'm more boring and uninteresting than I was in English, like in South Africa originally. And there's that grief. And then there's grief of, like you said, maybe you had in your mind this romanticized view of how things were going to go. And after 2 years, you realize, no, it's just everyday life, but in another country where it's maybe more difficult because you don't have a support system. So there's a lot of things that you're going to be grieving. What are your I mean, this is too much for now, but maybe you can somehow summarize it. But how do you work through that? What is your main guidelines for someone to work through that grief and try and get to the other side of it?
Well, the first step is always recognizing it and understanding, like you just did, like you kind of need to list it out. Because it's one thing to be like, yes, I'm grieving, but what? What exactly are you grieving?
Yeah.
And that can take some time because we think like it's just this, like you said, my humor is gone, but like from that, what else are you grieving? So I always have my clients like start with a kind of an umbrella of what it is, and then we go further down and down and down, and like what are the tree roots of this? And then from there, it's looking at what type of support do they want in healing that? Is it something they want to shift? Do they have control over? Like you with the humor, like, okay, if I learn the language better, I can start to throw it in, or I can say, screw it and continue and like, just let them not understand. And I feel authentic, whatever it might be. And then it's okay from there. What is we all need like a tradition or a ritual of letting go. And we forget that piece. And if you've ever had a family member or a friend die and you didn't get to go to the funeral or you didn't get to do something that had some closure, then you know this feeling of unrest of like, oh, I don't know that unless you do something yourself as a ritual or tradition of, okay, I'm letting go. And we need that too, even with small things that we grieve. And so having something like that. And then the next steps is really like, okay, where do I go from here? And in that center, that middle section, there's a lot of false beliefs, like without diving in Sean to therapy, but, I am humor because it protects me, because I feel like I will be rejected if I'm not, like there's a lot of false beliefs that then it's like, okay, well, I'm not actually rejected. And I feel more rejected when I'm humorous,
Yeah.
So you start to face those things and you start to go, well, does that belief system actually work for me anymore? No, yes or no. And one very common one, and I see it with expats often, is the why does this keep happening to me? Why is all like you keep hitting the red lights or everything is late that day? It's happening to you, and that's the belief system that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So if all these bad things keep happening, bad in quotations, negative things keep happening, impact my day, or people are doing things that hurt me, I must have done something wrong. But no, I haven't. I'm the victim.
Yeah.
And it's how we were parented. Good things happen when you did right and bad things happen when you did wrong. But as adults, that doesn't serve us anymore. Life just happens. But we keep thinking one way and we don't realize it until we look at what are we grieving and what are our belief systems about it. And those can be really hard to clear out and understand because we're so wrapped up in them.
Yeah. And then I have one last question for you. And I think it's a difficult one. And it's something that I've been asked a few times by foreigners is like, how do you know when to give up and go home if it's not working? Like, how much of it is coping with grief, accepting loss, or when do you just quit? Like, when do you just say, okay, enough? Like, it's kind of a difficult question. I guess it will be different for everyone.
This is the same question when somebody's trying to decide about a divorce. Mm-hmm. I always say the grass is greener on the other side, but you have to cut the grass on both sides. It will be difficult in both ways. Even when you return back home, again, you're different. And there might be a sense of relief in some ways, but you give it a little time and you go, ooh, I don't like that we do this here and I miss this. And so don't go into it thinking it will be the savior of this experience. I'll just go back home. Why would you decide to go back home? Is it because it's so difficult? Is it because, quote, you couldn't cut it? If you have any negative connotations about why you would return back home versus, hey, I have a great job opportunity. I have better support from family and friends. I understand the system more and it makes me feel more relaxed as a human being. If you've got positive reasons to shift and move, then go for it. But if it is about negative reasons, you'll harbor that when you move. You'll harbor that this, I had to leave because these people were blah, blah, blah. Instead, I have chosen, or we have chosen to stay here, but I, as the one living in a different country, have chosen to stay here because I know too much about my culture and about the school systems and the healthcare systems, being a therapist, working with kids and I know too much that I would not feel safe or comfortable having my kids over there. Right. If it was just my husband and I, we'd make it work and we'd live somewhere we'd want to live. But with a family, no. Here, I feel a lot better about it. Yeah. And so I've had to let go of Well, single Katie or just married Katie would totally live in the States and she'd live this life but family Katie wants to be in Germany because of XYZ. And sure, I miss so many things, but how do I create that in my own life here? How do I find those friendly people? How do I find those people I can joke with? How do I find, like, how do I create that community here? Because honestly, depending on where you are in Germany or any country, there are pockets of people like you. You kind of have to hunt sometimes, though, depending on where you are. So that for me is okay, if we ever moved back to the States, I know I would have to do a lot of personal work on being back there and being aggravated at the system and how they do things. And I probably would complain a lot. I would feel bad for those teachers and the doctors and stuff, because I'd be like, no, I don't like that you do this. This should be changed. So how do you know when it's time? When you're able to really give yourself good, solid, positive reasons, and you're realistic that it will be difficult to move back. Right. That there will be some feelings of like, wow, this is different. I'm different. Or you might have feelings of, quote, failure, which is not a feeling that we, quote, should have, but we're conditioned to feel like we failed if something doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's almost never so black and white.
Yeah. Yes. In true, well, I don't know this is fully German, but in true engineer German form, my husband had an Excel spreadsheet for our move. Should we move? Should we not? We had, percentage, like what was the most important on a scale of 1 to 10, then what percentage it had. It was beautiful and it was almost equal.
Okay.
Every time we did it, every shift was almost equal, that it's good to move to both places.
Yeah.
Yeah, grass is green.
Yeah.
You're still going to have to cut it. So it's okay. Sometimes there is no right or wrong. It's just make a choice and trial and error, jump, see if it works. And if it doesn't, come back.
Work at it. Yeah. Yes. Very cool. Well, Katie, it is incredible talking to you. I think you're very, very insightful, and thank you for sharing everything that you have. The book was called, just remind me again.
Yeah, The New Face of Grief.
The New Face of Grief. But you've also written some other books. Maybe you can just mention them.
Yeah. My second book is called Giving Birth to Motherhood. It's co-authored with my friend Amy McCracken, and it's how to therapeutically write your birth story. A lot of expat women have challenging, traumatic births because they don't have that support system they're used to having. And this book really guides you. It's a journal and book, guides you through the writing process to heal. And we have a specific and kind of special methodology we use in it. So, and I'll make sure that you have, for the New Face of Grief, I have a free audio chapter. I'll make sure you have the link to that if anybody listening would like that.
Yes, please. I'll put all of those details in the show notes, and also that link where you can get the free chapter. And people can connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, I'm katie.russler, Rossler. You can find me on Facebook as well. But yeah, LinkedIn, you can find me easy.
Katie, thanks so much for the chat. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll speak again sometime.
Thank you so much, Sean.
That's it. Thanks for listening. If you like this podcast and you're listening this far, then you must really like this podcast, or you like the episode a lot. Rate the podcast where you're listening to it. I don't know where you're listening to it right now. Go and see if there's a way you can rate it. Or you can go into my website, thegermanyexperience.de/rate, and it'll give you options to leave a review. So go and do that. And if you want to support the show, you can always buy me a coffee. There's a link in the show notes. I am grateful for every contribution that I get, because I don't make a profit from this podcast, but it helps me pay the bills that I need to pay to keep this podcast running. Thank you for listening. I'll speak to you next week. Auf Wiederhören.